In this section we're going to be creating our referee input screen. This screen is based on two different screens within our MySQL database. All of this information at the top, including the team names, is going to be generated from one SQL query. We're then going to have a separate query to populate all of our player drop-down fields. If we go across to our SQL database, we may remember that when we created our results section, we created this view. This view is going to be quite useful for us because this actually has most of the information on it that we're going to need. It has the home team name, the away team name, and the fixture date and time. In addition to this, however, we are going to need the fixture ID and the referee ID for what we're going to be doing. And so I'm going to actually alter this view to include those fields. So if I paste across the actual statements that we wrote when we created this view, we're going to change this create to alter. And we're going to add in the fixture, that's fixture ID, as well as the referee ID. Now we already have these tables inner joined, and so we don't actually need to do any more work to include these. And so if we select everything from that table again, we can see that we've got our additional two columns. If we go across to our IDE, we can begin to actually create this new element that we're going to be using to actually display our information. Now this element is going to be quite different to all of the other elements that we've created, and so I'm just going to copy a random one across, and we're going to rename this stretch result input. And we're also going to rename the actual HTML file to the same name. We then need to go through and change the name of the element. And we're not going to have a results attribute anymore, so we can delete that. Instead, we're going to have the home team name, the away team name, the fixture date, and the fixture time. Although we generate our referee ID and our fixture ID, we're not actually going to display them to our users. We can also delete most of this style. We're not going to display any data, and so we don't need the table data styling. We're also not going to have any links, and so we can delete that as well. Now we're not going to have a page header like we had in the past with this element at least. We're going to have a h1 header, and this is going to be generated from the information that we pass across. So we're going to have the home team name, vs away team name, and then in brackets we're going to have the date, which will be the fixture date, and the @ sign before the fixture time. We're not going to have a table in the same sense as we had in the past either, and so I'm going to comment out, or rather I'm going to delete most of the table section, and I'm going to comment out most of the template, which is used to refer to multiple elements within an array. We will be using this part of the code again when we're populating the elements with our player names, but for now we don't need it. Now because we've already created most of the attributes, we can go ahead and create the players attribute as well, which is where we're going to actually store the players data. And so now that we've got the outline of our elements in place, we can go ahead and import that onto our actual page. So I'm just going to copy and paste the code from another page across. Now we're not going to be calling this results data. Instead we're going to be calling it results input data. And it will be possible for us to have multiple input sections if there are multiple games in a week. And so we're going to keep this for loop intact. You do have to rename this, however, to result input. And we also need to change the names of all of our elements. We don't no longer have a heading element, for example. We have a home team element. We also no longer have a results section. Instead we have the away team name. In fact, because we've already got our decoding here, we'll use this for our players section. And we also have an away team name. As well as our fixture date. And fixture time. So now we need to actually get this information out of our database and to pass it across to our view. So to do that, in our input section, we're going to put this view results input data is equal to this model get results input data. And at the same time as this, we're going to want to pass across our referee ID. So the idea will be that after we have results input, we will have a slash and then a number. And this number is going to refer to the referee's ID. So to pass that across, we're going to have referee ID. And we're going to set that to null, just in case we don't have any information passed across. If the referee ID is null, we're actually not going to let our users see this page at all. Instead, we're going to render the index/index page. So we just copy and paste this across. Assuming that we do have an ID, we're going to have, as we say, move this data from our model across to our view. We do, however, need to code this section. And so we're going to call this get results input data. And we're going to take the referee ID across. Now, because we've already instantiated the Stretch League element, we're going to do the same here. In fact, because we're doing this multiple times, we're going to create a constructor. And this is going to create our new Stretch League for us. And so we need to then go ahead and go over to our Stretch League and create this new function. which in our model we have called getResult input data. It's this again going to take our referee ID, and this time we're going to set it just as a default to %, because this is going to be going into our SQL statement. So as I say, the first thing I want to do is get the data for this top section. We're not going to worry about the players yet, and so I'm just going to put all of the information into a results variable, and we're going to get the database and use it to select we're just going to select all initially just to make sure that we can connect properly. Where our referee ID is equal to referee ID, and we're going to actually bind this data, so we'll do that now while we remember. Now at the moment this is going to return every single instance where the referee has refereed the game in the past. We only want it to return the results within the past 5 days, however. So we're going to add an AND in here where the fixture date is greater than the current date minus 5 days. And we're going to obviously return that. So if we go back ahead across to our web page and refresh, we're not going to see any output because we haven't actually linked to our new element yet. So if we go back to our initial page, on our input page, you can see that we're still linking to result, and it should be to result input. And actually you can see that this should be get results input data. And we'll just make sure that that's correct in here. And it turns out that we're not actually looking for the referee ID to be equal to the referee ID. We're looking to be like the referee ID. In this way we're able to actually use our wildcard. So if we refresh our page, we can see that we have multiple elements output. And this is because we haven't actually passed across the referee ID in our model. So if we refresh our page again, we can see that we're going to get just 2 results, which is just the 2 results that this referee has actually refereed in the past 5 days. So the next thing is to build our table that we're going to use to actually house this section. So if we go back across to our input element, we can begin by creating a very simple table. We're not obviously going to have table header and table body in this table. This is purely for layout. We're basically going to have 3 rows, and each row is going to have 3 columns. In this first column, we're going to have the home team name. In this third column, we're going to have the away team name. Then we're going to have this section where we're going to actually display the select. Sections. And this is where we're going to have our actual submit button, which we can actually copy across. And at the bottom we're going to have just 2 spans, which are going to be empty for now. the IDs of these are going to be home, goals, in fact home team goals. And we'll have away team goals as well. And so this is where we're going to display the output of the total number of goals scored for each team at the moment, which is going to be calculated using JavaScript. So if we go back across to our page and refresh, we can see that we have these sections, which obviously we're still missing the player data, but this is more close to what we intended it to be. The data is still quite different, however, and so we can go ahead and correct that now. So in our stretch league, all we need to do is copy across the format that we've used in another fixture date. In fact, we need to actually list all of the elements that we want to output from this result. So we want the home team name, the away team name, fixture. We'll copy the fixture date there, and then the fixture time. And we're also going to output the fixture ID, even though we're not going to put that on our page. The only reason we added the referee ID is so that we can filter it by the referee ID here. So now that we've updated the date and we refresh, we can see that we've got our properly formatted dates. So before we move ahead, let's just go ahead and style our full table here, so that it actually stretches out and takes up as much space as it actually needs to, rather than being squashed like it is at the moment. So all we're going to do is go to our public style sheet, and we're going to copy across our table.fullWidth into our custom element, and we're going to apply this class to our table. And so as you can see, it's taking up as much space as it actually needs. We could go a step further and actually set the specific widths that each table column is going to take. And because we have 3 columns, we'll just set them all to 33%. In this way, we're always going to have some sort of structure. So the next thing we need to do is to actually get our player data and return that from our database. So if we go back across to our stretch league, before we return our results, we're going to actually perform a second select statement. And we're just going to create another variable called players at the moment. And we are going to need to go ahead and create another view to actually get at this data in the format that we're going to want it. So in order to get at the data that we want, we're first going to need to select our player name, our player ID, and the fixture ID. We're going to select that from the fixture player table, which will be inner joined to our player table on the player dot player ID being equal to the fixture player player ID. We also need to specify that this is going to come from the fixture table, or the fixture player table, sorry. And we're also going to want to save this as a view called team player name. And if we select all from this, we get our search query back. And so when it comes to selecting our players, we want to select all, for now, from team player name where fixture ID is equal to our results fixture ID. And at the moment we can return multiple lines in this section, and so at the moment we're only going to return all of the players from the first section, from the first actual fixture that the referee has refereed. So we're going to need to put this inside of a for loop. And we're going to replace this 0 with I. And because we're using arrays within arrays, we should also escape our main string here and append a semicolon to the end of our string. Now, instead of actually creating a new array, which we would then have to return, we can actually apply this output to our existing results array. And we're going to apply it in the specific element in an index called players. And so if we refresh our page now, we're not going to see any difference here, but if we actually go into our input page, we can delete all of this now, by the way. We can also echo out. In fact, we'll have to var dump it because it's an array. But we can see the players within our input. So if you refresh now, we can see that at the moment we have no players assigned to play in either of these fixtures. If we go into our league function and specifically override this so that we will always get an output, we'll be able to see all of the actual player names who are going to take part in this fixture. Now, just because we have a sample database, we don't have all of this information for every single fixture in the past, because the database would just be too big. But you can also see that we're going to be passing across extra information that we're not going to need in the form of the player ID and the fixture ID. And so if we undo our change, so that we are actually referring to live data. So just for the moment, I'm just going to comment out this section so that we can refer to it again later. But for now we're going to use this first fixture just as a test so that we can actually populate our elements properly with using some actual live data. So now we've got this player's data available to us. Which means that we can rename results to players. We can basically change this entire if we copy this section across into our select box, both of them in fact, and refresh our page, we will see all of the players available to us to select as being a goal scorer within our actual fixture. Now we also want to add in an element here so that we can select that no one has scored, and so I'll go ahead and do that now. And to do that, it's just a matter of creating a new option called no selection, and we'll copy this across to our other select option as well. So now we can go ahead and delete this output. It served its purpose in helping us see that we do have some output. And so the next thing will be to add our two buttons with a plus and minus. So if we copy our button, in fact we don't need to copy it, we should create a new button. And we're not going to actually submit, we're going to use these within JavaScript, and so it's easier to just use the button type. So we've reached the point whereby we have the same output as we had with our template, but this time created using custom elements. We're going to stop this section here, and in our next video we're going to deal with importing the data into our database, and also with the JavaScript front end, which is going to allow us to create basically duplicates of the templates and output what will be a numeric result, so that our referees can actually verify the input before they submit the form. So stay tuned so that you don't miss out. If we come back to our page and refresh the page, we're going to see that our background colour is set for these elements.